UFC 300. There's news about UFC 300. Uh, Daniel Cormier had a little bit to say on kind of what he thinks it's going to be coming up here in the next few months. Got five, so there'd be four pay-per-views until then: 96, 97, 98, 99, and then it'll be, yeah. So four more pay-per-views until 300. Daniel said some interesting things about who he thinks might be, part of that card. Connor Chandler being one of them, which I think being 300, like you have to have big names. I think Connor is going to be in that fight card. Uh, Whether he headlines it or not, I kind of don't see there being any way that he doesn't headline it. He in a way is the UFC. Like he's the biggest draw of the UFC, brings the most attention to UFC cards. But looking at some of these fights that are possible, you just had Alex Pereira win, which he said that he thinks whoever wins in that one will end up headlining 300. And I think that's where Pereira maybe was trying to like give that little bit of an alley oop to Adesanya, like, hey, let's do this UFC 300, big card, big storyline, like let's load it up. But with him saying, he's not interested, who knows? Maybe Dana gets on the phone with him and is able to convince him otherwise with money. Um, but if not, Jamal Hill's there. If Jamal Hill's able to come back in time, you have that fight there. I think that's an awesome fight to do to have on UFC 300. Um, Maybe they'll go for um, three title fights on that card, which would be crazy if they do get that done. And if Connor is still headlining the event, like that's where I'm kind of curious with what happens with that. Like, I just really don't see Connor fighting if he's not headlining. So maybe they make that happen, and that would be one of the craziest things to have go on in a card. But it being UFC 300, I think anything is possible. In terms of them doing things that usually you don't see happen, especially for somebody like Connor. Um, he also said, uh, whoever wins the welterweight fight, maybe them defending, which that'll be in December, maybe them defending again for that card. Which what would be crazy, what I could see possibly happening, and I think this would be the best case scenario for the UFC to load up that card and have a bunch of crazy fights on it, is you have Kobe Covington capture the welterweight title and then goes and calls out Islam Makhachev. That fight gets agreed upon, and then you have them fighting in that UFC 300 card. Now, obviously, Kobe has to win that fight. Unless Edwards is also down to have that fight happen as well. I just don't know how willing he would be to have that happen. But if Kobe Covington can get the win and win that title, I think that's a fight that the UFC would love to make for UFC 300. Just the storyline of it, Islam going for champ status. Kobe's already been running his mouth with Makachev. Uh, Kobe brings in, eyeballs. People like to, see him lose. Um, he plays that heel pretty well. And then Makachev brings in a huge audience with people from the Middle East. Like, I just think that this would be a fight that would, really make that UFC 300 card really stand out. And then if we were to have another fight that, let's see, what else? What could stand out? The only other thing that I could see standing out is, um, whether you have, they just had, she's hurt, so or yeah, she's hurt, so I don't think that she's gonna be fighting anytime soon. Is it Roy Vall that's fighting Pantoja? I think it is. If it's Roy Vall that's fighting Pantoja, another fight that I can possibly see happening in time for that is if Royval can get a win at featherweight and they throw in, I don't know also too if uh I don't think Moreno has any fights lined up. I don't know if they've announced anything with Moreno. They might have, but if not, I could also see maybe a Pantoja or excuse me, a Royval versus Moreno happen. Or you throw in if say Pantoja wins, you can also throw him defending his belt against Amir Albazi if he's able to get the next shot. Something like that. But for sure I think it'd be very interesting with like a Makachev, Kobe Covington, and a like I said, ultimately it would be the best in the interest of the UFC and to load up the card for it to be Alex Pereira versus Israel Adesanya for UFC 300, but doesn't look like he wants to fight. So him and Jamal Hill would do too. And those are some potential. Just going off of what DC had said, I think that those maybe are something that can come to fruition. Another cool thing that I would like, it would be crazy if it was able to happen is like throw in like maybe a Dustin Poirier fights like Nate Diaz uh for UFC 300 too. Diaz comes in, tries to beat Poirier, so if he can beat Poirier, he can then afterwards call out Connor and be like, "I beat the boy that beat you in your last two. What's up?" That sets up for maybe a trilogy fight between them. Um that's something that I could also see happening as well. It would be very crazy if it did.